you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Beth Miller. Welcome to the show, Beth.
Well, thank you, Matt. It's a real honor and pleasure to be talking to you today.
Excellent. I'm excited to jump into the conversation, but before we do that, do you mind just starting with a quick introduction for people who doesn't know you?
Yeah, sure. I lead Executive Velocity, which is a talent management, leadership development advisory firm, and we work primarily with small, mid-sized companies, upwards of 300 employees. So we will work with business owners and their leadership team, as well as help identify future leaders and develop them as well.
That sounds exciting. And one of the things I love the most about management is really building teams, building companies, and developing stuff, right? So that is probably why I'm so excited for today. Right, let's jump right into it. The biggest issue for definitely a lot of smaller businesses is really getting the right. Well, I see there being two problems. One is hiring the right people, but also a little bit the challenge of actually putting the right people in the right seats. So sometimes I see people hiring great people, but putting them in a totally wrong roles based on their personality and skill set and so on, right? So I think if we start out with hiring, what's sort of the mindset and what's sort of the philosophy you follow around that?
Well, my philosophy is have a good process. A lot of smaller businesses really don't have a hiring process. You know, they'll have a job description, they'll get some interviews in, some resumes in, and then they'll interview kind of randomly. They don't have specific questions that they've created for that position, so that when they get to the point of trying to make a decision, they don't have the same data that they have acquired from each applicant. The other thing I see 9 times out of 10 with smaller businesses is they don't use an assessment that will help eliminate a lot of the bias as it relates to hiring. So the process is probably the one thing that I see is missing. And then the other is actual interviewing skills. Nobody's taught how to interview. Generally, you get a job, you become a manager or supervisor, and all of a sudden you have to hire somebody. And HR may have, helped bring in applicants, and you're handed resumes, and you're never taught how to ask really good questions and listen for the right kind of answer. So it's the skills of a manager and the process that.
Yeah, I find it really, really interesting, right? I tell all the small business owners I work with, I always tell them the same, like the 2 most important things as a business owner or a manager, the 2 most important things to work on is the ability to hire the right people and your ability to build good relationship with them and develop them, right? That's, for me, the 2 most important things you do. Because if you get the right people on board, everything else just becomes that much easier. Right.
We agree.
I think let's try and break it down a little bit, because I think definitely, as you say, a lot of people don't really know how to go around that. So if we start with sort of the start of the recruitment process, and I tend to always start with sort of the role, right, and figuring out, because this is also where a lot of people are wrong, or not wrong, where they get confused. It's like, I'm just myself right now. Who am I going to hire?
Yeah, and oftentimes new managers, inexperienced ones, hire mini-me's, the people that are very similar to themselves. I see that a lot, especially when I do assessments for candidates. I was just doing a couple the other day, and I know this company really well. And they gravitate to that same profile of the CEO business owner. And the problem is that now that team is lopsided. They've got a lot of spontaneity on the team, and they don't have a lot of planned people on the team. So, you need to understand what you bring to the team and what you need to fill.
And it goes back to one of the most common sayings, right? Like, people always hire people like themselves.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That is so true. And I love the way you put it. I think the way I tend to look at it is fairly similar. I think when you're starting a business, you need to look at the business and the situation as well, because you can either hire someone to do what you're doing right now, or you can hire someone to do something that's not getting done today, right? So if you're the product person and you're really good with the product, you could hire a sales guy, right? Again, if you're doing a ton of sales and you need more sales, you can hire another sales guy as well, right? So there's a bunch of options that you can look at in terms of who is the right first hire, right? And I think that there's not really a right or wrong answer to that one. I think in all small businesses, though, you want to hire flexibility, right? Because when you only have a few staff members, it's important for people to be versatile, right?
Very, yes, yeah.
Okay.
And I think the other challenge is that when you are hiring those versatile people, is that if you're trying to build like a software development company, for instance, you're going to want some people that are really, really deep in their knowledge of programming or whatever it is. They're not going to be as flexible as maybe the marketing person is. So you've got to have that balance depending on what kind of company you're building.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is probably one of the areas where I see the biggest collapse of small business, because particularly developers really like other developers. And I see so often where you see a team of 2 or 3 people who are all developers partnering, and it's not a good combo, right?
Well, yeah, because you're not covering your bases on other things like finance and marketing and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense. So basically, start out figuring out who is it exactly you need. How do you go around? So you mentioned something very particular around the sort of questions to be asking and so on. Let's say, one step before that. So finding the candidates, getting the right sort of people in front of you in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that what I find there is a lot of small businesses, they don't understand how to attract good candidates. And a lot of that is marketing and sales. And what they'll do is like a platform like Indeed, where they'll take the job description and cut and paste it into a system like Indeed, instead of taking that job description and reworking it into a job posting that is a marketing tool to get more people to apply for the job. So I see that as a really big mistake.
So one of the key things I always say is recruitment is not fulfillment. It's sales. And most people treat it like fulfillment. They're like, oh, we have this thing we need to fill. But really, effective recruitment is all about sales, because even like you have to sell your company. Like if you want any random Joe coming in from the street, you can just put a random job ad up that look like shit and you'll find someone. But if you want A players, you really have to sell them your business. You have to sell them your values and your vision, right?
Yeah. One of the things that I do, and I do a hiring workshop, and one of the exercises is creating your company story, and then creating your story as it's associated with the company story, so that you can share how you have progressed within the company to get the applicant excited about the company. Most companies don't have that at all. It's foreign to them.
Yeah, so I work a lot in this online digital space, and there is actually some companies doing really, really good job descriptions and so on, which is really interesting to see. But they've sort of caught on, and they've realized, very often they struggle with limited budgets, but they've figured out if they do really good job description and make the job really interesting, they can actually get great people at not horribly expensive rates, right? So
yeah, exactly.
That's good. Okay. Then we can go on to the next one in terms of, so the step in between is kind of when you then get your inbox full up, right? So one of the things I always tell people, when you do a job post, create a separate email address, because the amount of business owners that I see is trying to find like 17 resume in their last 1,000 emails.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's a good technique, yeah.
So, but yeah, I always tell people create a separate email for jobs, and sometimes even if you're getting a lot of job posts, like create a separate email per job, but generally just have a jobs email inbox, right?
Yeah.
But how do you pick what candidates to interview? And
yeah, right, exactly, because you really want to funnel it down to get to maybe 3 or 4 that you're going to spend time with, and that's up front, it's making sure that you've got the right filters on like the Indeeds of the world. But then it's getting some additional questions together for a phone screen that will further eliminate individuals. There was one situation that comes to mind where my client had actually did a phone interview with an out-of-town applicant, and they flew her in to have an interview. And at the end, they found out that she wasn't going to pass the credit report screening, and she was going to be in finance, so that was critical. And so, if they had asked that question in the phone screen, not only would they save their time, but also their money. Yeah, so it's getting more questions that can further narrow the field. That you want to make sure they're questions that are ones that are important.
Yeah.
Not those like behavioral interviewing questions.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so that's, again, like a lot of my clients, because they are running online businesses all around the world and stuff, they are a little bit different. But one thing that definitely works really well is basically asking candidates to do a 2-minute video of why they think they would be a great fit for the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that is probably my absolute favorite, because I mean, when we do it, right, like I think probably 50% of the people we can remove from the process just from that 2-minute video, right?
That's a really good technique. I've heard something similar, but not from a video perspective, and that is some sort of written, answering some sort of question as it relates to the position.
Yeah, so what the reason why we found the video to work really well is, first of all, you can hear how people communicate, right? And from behavioral standpoint and so on, you can figure out the behavior as well, which is powerful. But then I think it's also, so for us, a lot of our clients also deal with, people in various countries, and sometimes, testing simple things like English communication skills and so on can be important. But also, I think just getting the feel for people, like, sometimes I remember one client, like this woman was applying for a job, and she was sitting recording a video in her car with 3 kids screaming on the back seat and so on. And it was just obvious that she didn't take it that serious, right? Because if you really wanted the job, like that's not how you do a video. But those kind of things also, like, they're not always 100% right, but it just helps you eliminate candidates that are potentially not a good fit.
Yeah.
So, and any other great tips from you in terms of candidate elimination in general?
You mean before you get face to face with them?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think those are the ones that I generally will talk to clients about. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm going to take that video one. And
it's definitely good. So what we also often do, if it's like, let's say you're looking for a role where someone have to be really good at following directions or very detail oriented, we would actually tell them exactly where to put the video and so on.
Yeah.
So for example, upload this video on YouTube in private setting, so basically like, 5 steps or something, because again, if you are looking for someone who's very good at following direction and stuff, someone detail oriented, that can help eliminate some people again. Right?
Yep.
And again, what I also like a lot about the video is the fact that, you have these people that send out like 100 CVs a day and think it's just like a numbers game, right? And most of those are generally too lazy to actually spend 2 minutes doing a video. And a lot of those people just won't reply. And that's good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
get them to self-select out. That's I had a really interesting situation. Oh gosh, a couple of years ago, there's a high-tech firm here in Atlanta who's rapidly growing. And I happen to know the founder, and he invited me into an interview. It was a panel interview. And one of the questions that they asked was, what's your favorite swear word and how do you like to use it? And, I tried to keep a straight face. And after we left, I was like, Rob, what's with that question? He said, there's a lot of swearing going on in our company. And I want to make sure that whoever comes in kind of understands that, right? And there were people that self-selected out. And that's great.
Yeah, and again, that's a great way of actually reinforcing your culture and
right.
sharing your culture with potential employees, right? I love that example. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Okay, so if we then move on to nowadays, actually a lot of people nowadays, it all ends up being these Zoom calls or Skype calls and stuff. So
right.
even like a preliminary call is often with video and stuff as well. But if we say we're going to like a proper interview, how do you determine what questions to ask and how do you go around that process?
Yeah, so this gets back to understanding the core competencies of your company. And a lot of small businesses don't understand core competencies. They've never heard of it before. But basically, it's taking your values of your organization and understanding what behaviors are going to support those values. And then from that, what competencies are supporting those behaviors. So it's kind of a cascading effect. So you have to have a competency model. And large companies get them, can be very complex. I make it a lot more simpler. But once you understand that for every applicant, for every employee, they need to be accountable, for instance, then you create behavioral interview questions to uncover how accountable that person is. And it's a specific question that won't lead the witness. So you can't use the word accountability in the question. But tell me about a time that you were given a project and you were working with a number of other people on a team. So you can get some team aspect in there as well. But that the project didn't go well. What did you do? And then you look for and listen for, in all these behavioral interview questions, you listen for I and not we. And then you listen for, how did they learn? What was their learning process? What were the results? Did they take ownership for the mistakes, or did they pass it along to somebody else? So you want questions that are asked for that position that is consistent through each interview. So that way you can match apples to apples. If you're asking different questions of different applicants, how can you possibly make the decision?
Yeah, I agree. One exception though is if you're asking them specific questions about their resume or their history. But
yes,
yeah,
totally
agree.
Yeah, this is more around the behaviors. Yeah. So that's what I see as a struggle for small, even larger companies will do this as well. But most of my work is again with smaller companies. So I see that a lot.
So I was really lucky early on in my career. So what happened was I worked first with a company called Xerox, and basically it was a large company, and there was probably 2,000 people on the site we were at. So it was a big sort of area. And what happened was they had the HR department who was usually responsible for recruitment. Yes. And the problem was very often the managers and so on never had time to recruit. So actually, even before I moved into a leadership or management position, I actually had the pleasure of getting to help out the HR with recruiting, which was very, very interesting. And I was lucky to get experience with that very early on, right? Because I think that's one of these big tricks that most large companies just miss, because if you let a recruitment company or recruitment organization just deal with everything, and they are not really, really good at understanding what you do and what the candidates need, that can be very problematic.
Yes, because then you're being sent applicants that you're going to spend time on that's a waste of your time.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I saw happening was that you literally had someone delivered to your door and said, "Oh, this guy passed an interview, he'll start tomorrow." And you're like,
"Oh, gosh, that's terrible."
Interesting. And I was like, and that was, I mean, I worked with IBM as well, where that was also a typical approach, right? And I'm like, that was one thing I learned very early on in that experience, was that you need to hire the people who work for you, because it's all about accountability. Because what I saw, every time someone struggled a little bit, it was so easy for the manager or the team leader or whatever to say, "Oh, well, that's because HR always give me crap people." So rather than actually taking ownership and responsibility, it made it so much easier for them to push that away. Obviously, that's not a good sign from that individual, but I can understand it as a person. Like, I've managed people, and if you just have someone dump down your leg in your hands, and you're like, why on earth would anyone hire this individual? That's definitely an interesting situation. But it's super relevant to entrepreneurs though, because I see this happening a lot, where either the business owner is trying to hire for some of his or her managers, or they don't like hiring and they let other people in the company hire people for them. Yeah. And both of those are, from my perspective, misfit, right? So basically my philosophy is very, very clear. The person hiring, making the final hiring decision, is the person they report to. Yes. Right? So if I have a new manager that I've never interviewed before, I would still go in the interview with them. I would still support them through that interviewing process if I feel that's the right thing. But in the end of the day, I will always let them make the final choice, because it's their responsibility to make the person deliver, right? Exactly. So, right. So interesting. I like that. So lots of behavioral focused questions. That's always useful. Any particular sort of points or any particular things that you've seen otherwise that really work well, or doesn't work well, and so on, in terms of interview questions specifically? Not specific questions, because everybody has a different set of core competencies that they're looking for. Yeah, but the people that get them right are the ones that will make better hiring decisions. I will say that having an assessment, validated assessment tool as well will help, because oftentimes
you have somebody kind of that mini me, and that's where an assessment tool can help you build out your team and understand some of the natural behaviors that people will have and will go to when they're under stress. That, I'm helping a marketing company right now. They're in the midst of hiring a number of folks, and for some reason they keep choosing these mini me's but the assessment lets them know that. And so now, they've got one person who's really good at what they do, and we're profiling that person, and we're now looking back at the job posting. Who are you attracting, and your filters to get to the point where you're getting all these mini me's. There's something wrong in the back end that we need to figure out.
Right. So there's actually one thing. That's a great point, because this is one thing that one of the problems is when you're writing a job description, you often write it the way you like to read it.
Yeah.
And what that often means is that you appeal to people who communicate like you.
Exactly.
So if you're very straight to the point, very goal-oriented, then you're looking for a job description like that. So if you're writing the job description, that in itself, in many cases, will make it more likely to find more people who have a behavior that's more similar to your own. Right?
That's a great point. Great point. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I'm a huge fan of a particular assessment tool, but what do you usually recommend from an assessment
I
standpoint?
actually use an assessment. First of all, they need to be validated. There are some great assessment tools out there that are good for development purposes and team building, but they're not validated, like Myers-Briggs. So make sure that if you're using an assessment tool, it's one that's validated for hiring purposes. Now, the one I use happens to be an assessment that comes from Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, Georgia. And the owner, I happen to know and known him for a long time. And what I liked about the assessment was not only was it validated for hiring, but it had language that you could understand. So, for instance, I'm certified in Myers-Briggs as well, but if you said to somebody, okay, I'm an ENTP, it's not really descriptive. Whereas using the business DNA, I'm an influencer. I'm not an initiator. I'm not an adapter. So it's more descriptive when you're talking to somebody, and you can create a language internally in the organization around this assessment tool, so that people then understand, okay, Beth is an influencer, and her strongest factors are creative and spontaneous. So she's not planned, and she loves to create new things. And that also means that from a communication standpoint, she likes high-level bullets and visual cues versus somebody who's into the detail.
Yeah, I like that. So I'm an absolutely humongous fan of the DISC framework. And the reason I love DISC above anything else is the fact that it is so, when you're good at it, it's so simple to tell people personality from their behaviors.
Yes.
So my fundamental problem with all the assessments is, one, a lot of people don't know themselves very well, and often assessments reflect that. And two, in interview situations in particular, no matter what you tell people, they will always pick the answers they think you want to hear, right? So even if you tell people like, oh, it's an assessment to understand your personality, I've seen it so many times where, people are consciously sitting trying to second guess what are they looking for, right? And I see, I've done a lot of tests where, I've seen a person's personality, and then you look at the test at the interview stage, and it just doesn't match, right?
That's interesting. I think DISC is one that will measure the natural and then the adapted. So that adapted is probably the one where things kind of go awry. I mean, it's pretty hard to really game the system. A lot of assessments will have what's called the bullshit factor, and they will alert, gosh, this person, some of these responses are highly counter to previous ones. The business DNA does not have that, but what it does, it's highly validated. What it does is it measures your personality, your behaviors that were built between 0 and 3 years old. So it's things that worked for you as a kid. So for instance, one of the things that it measures is self-reliance. And I am like off the chart self-reliant. Well, my theory is because when I was 5, I had 3 younger brothers. I had to become independent to survive because my mother was busy with number 3 and number 4. So those things were built in really early on. Now, that can be good and bad. And then you've got to figure out, okay, based on experience, when do I personally need to be group oriented versus highly independent? And that's when you get into the behavioral questions as well. If you're looking for a team player who builds consensus and you see somebody who's highly independent, you need to ask them questions of, tell me about a time when you had to build consensus with a team, and how did you approach it and stuff like that.
I find that super interesting, right? Because I've worked with DISC for probably about 15 years now, so I've invested a lot of hours, and what I do see is similar to what you're saying, is that basically people's natural behavior, it's either something they're born with or something that happens to them very early on, right? Yeah. Because I mean, you can see a 3-year-old kid, when you look at their behavior, you can understand their natural behavior, and you can understand like what they're going to be like when they grow up. Right?
Exactly.
And I think that's what I find. Like honestly, when I first started learning about this, as kids, you're always told like everyone's unique and all this yada yada. Yeah. But when you actually start learning behaviors, and you realize, no, we're not actually. We can be boxed in pretty well, right? That's both interesting, but it's so valuable, particularly in recruitment situations, right? Yeah. And particular roles where I've seen this play out is in roles when you're hiring accountants, and it's particularly the detail-oriented roles, because very often that's people who are not very good at selling themselves. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what you often have is you have these sort of more salesy people or more assertive people coming into those kind of interview. They're needing a job, and the thing is they talk really well for themselves, and they're really good at, selling themselves. And I see so many business owners ending up with people in these type of very detail-oriented roles where it's just absolutely not the right fit because of this.
Right. And that's where an assessment will shine.
Exactly. Yeah.
You'll be able to see right away, okay, this person has been an accountant for the last umpty-ump years. How often can they be detailed? And, is that putting them under stress? I personally majored in finance,
but it's not something you enjoy.
No. The first 7 years of my professional life, I was having to do detail work. And it was stressing me out. I was not, I was good at it, but it wasn't a passion of mine. And, fortunately at the time I was working for a large company, and I was able to transfer into a sales training position and moved into sales. But if I had that ability to take one of those assessments back before I declared my major, I probably would have changed to marketing or, organizational behavior, something like that, versus finance.
So, and it's actually, it's funny because it's one of the things that I'm like, I cannot understand, like colleges and schools and education systems and so on, that they don't do this kind of thing.
Right.
Again, and I see it both ways. Like I see people who start, like they see like, oh, these, developers, they build these great companies and suddenly they're a billionaire and, all this stuff. And it sounds cool to them. And they start this 4 or 5 year education and you're like, yeah, they get dizzy when they see a spreadsheet with 10 numbers on it, right? They're never going to be a programmer. And I find it annoying to some extent, but so sad really, that educational institutions aren't utilizing that kind of information more to actually help people make good choices. Because I know they're all trying to fill quotas and get people to pay, but like you're so much better off if people actually have a successful outcome.
Right.
Like it's so much easier to be a teacher. It's so much better for like your reputation and everything if people actually have a great outcome from being in your school, right?
Yeah, don't get me on that whole.
No, I realize I'm probably running in the wrong direction right now. So, right. Let's go to the sort of final hiring decision. So you've interviewed really well. You've found a couple of people that are well. So basically, I have a filter saying I sometimes see people hire the best person, even if they're not good enough, and that's a risk, right? So one of the key things that I always tell people is the first thing: don't fall in love with someone. You need to sit down and say, are you comfortable this person can really do the job well? And the first time you hire, that might be difficult, right? But when you have hired 5, 6, 7 people, so often business owners bend into the pressure of, oh, we really need someone, and hire even though they're not comfortable with the decision. So the first thing for me is I always ask business owners, how many of these people that you have interviewed do you actually think would be a great individual in your business? And the answer should always be at least one if you are going to hire one of the people you have talked with, right?
Right, exactly.
But any particular sort of other decisions or any particular thinking around hiring otherwise?
Yeah, I think that there's the old adage that you can't teach attitude, but you can teach skills. So if you find, for instance, a great programmer that might not have all the right technical skills, you can teach them that. It's like finding salespeople. Oh my gosh, how difficult is that? A lot of people go to find just a great person who has the profile that has the behaviors that would make a good salesperson, and then train them. Granted, smaller companies don't have oftentimes the resources or the time to do that. So what I find is they're looking for somebody that can hit the ground running.
Or sometimes the skill set. I mean, so sometimes you have a company who is not developers, who is looking for a developer to help them, and they aren't the trainers. And so that makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's a delicate balance when you're hiring, especially the smaller the company, the harder it is, because a bad hire in a business of 10 is so much harder to recover from than a bad hire in a company of 50 or 100.
Yeah, or even lower. Like if you're doing your first, second, third, fourth hire and you hire someone really bad like that, it can literally cripple your business, right?
Yeah.
Because you need an ROI. Like in the beginning, like even affording to hire a full-time staff member in the beginning, that's a lot of money. And if they don't work out, like that is expensive.
Yeah, and that gets back to making sure that the individual is going to fit with your culture. That person could have been a superstar in a larger company, okay, and then go into a smaller company. And that was something that we ran into a number of times when we had our consulting company. Is we'd hire from like a Accenture, and they would come in and they would expect, this was back 20 years ago, they'd expect to have somebody answering the phones, those kinds of things. they were a bad fit. They didn't understand how to work within a smaller company that had fewer resources, et cetera. But it's also the culture too.
Yep.
You want to make sure that the person fits your culture. I liken it to the palm tree. The palm tree will thrive in Florida, but if you pick it up and transplant it into Alaska, it's going to die. It's the same thing with people. If you don't get the right cultural fit, that individual is not going to last long in your company.
Yep.
And it costs a lot of money for turnover.
Yeah, I mean, recruitment is expensive, but turnover, like having to let go of staff and so on, is really expensive, because then you need to do the whole thing over again, right? So it's both the wasted time and energy in the person who's leaving, but also the fact that you actually need to start that whole process over again, right?
You get a lot of other things that you have to do as a business owner, and having to replace somebody is time consuming.
No fun. Yeah. Okay, that sounds excellent. I think that's anything else before we sort of finish off on this recruitment? Any other sort of key tips?
Well, I think the other thing is once you hire somebody, they've accepted the position, you need to immediately onboard them. Even though they may not be starting for a couple of weeks, you need to keep them excited about their decision and have a really rigorous onboarding program that starts from the day they accepted the position all the way out 90 plus days, so they're fully integrated, not just into their position, but into the culture of the organization, and that they understand kind of the unwritten rules. I often suggest, assigning a mentor for an individual that's joining the organization, and making sure that they're integrated quickly. I don't know if you've heard these stories, but there are a lot of companies, especially smaller ones, where a applicant will agree to a start date and they never show up. There's a lot of ghosting going on. I mean, think about that. You've spent all that time, and 2 weeks later you're waiting for this individual to show up. Nothing. But that's why I like to start onboarding immediately after they've accepted, to continue the excitement of the decision that the applicant had made.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good advice, and I think that's again, particularly in smaller businesses, it's hard to know how to do that well. But I think the essence is, again, you keep the communication, because I've seen people that have told, "Yep, you're hired. You can start 3 weeks from now," and then if they don't hear a thing from you, like if they don't, like they hardly know where to show up, like they're like, "Ooh, what's this company all about? Like what's happening here? Why are they not telling me things? Why are they not talking to me, etc.?" That's a huge turnoff, right? And even if they're still excited if they do show up and so on, you're definitely much better off giving them more early on. And by the way, it's also a great learning opportunity, because my experience is that the more people know about your business the day they walk into your business, the more likely they are to be successful. Right?
Exactly.
So if you can give them more info, if you can give them like that could be simple things like, check out our most common products on our website, or like, and you can't say, "Oh, you have to do this before you show up." But the thing is, most people who are excited, they're eager. They're eager. They want to do it. Right.
Exactly.
Right. I think that is great. So before we finish off, anything else, any other sort of amazing tips, any other amazing resources or the likes that you think would be valuable for the audience around what we've talked about?
I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yep, definitely. Definitely. That's good. Any sort of favorite books or anything that you're a big fan of in this area?
One that's great for smaller businesses is one called How to Be a Great Boss. It's written by Gino Wickman. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Traction.
Love Gino Wickman. Yeah.
So I use that quite a bit for new manager training. Use that as a reference. Yeah.
Excellent.
So that's a great one.
Well, Beth, it has been fantastic talking with you. If people are eager to get hold of you after listening to our call today or our podcast, what's the best way of getting hold of you? And
there's two ways. One is through LinkedIn. You can find me as Beth Armknecht Miller, and I will spell that. It's ARMKNECHT Miller. I'm the only one there. So just type that in, you'll find me on LinkedIn. And
perfect.
I do accept in messages. And then also my website, which is www.executive-velocity.com. You can contact me through that as well. And on that website, I've got a lot of free resources that are downloadable that will help you in your hiring process.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing, Beth. I will include the links to all this good stuff on the show notes as well. So for the audience, if you do want to get hold of Beth, you can also find it on the podcast page. So thank you very much for joining me today, Beth. It was a pleasure talking to you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.